There's a strange confidence in the air at the start of 2026, a confidence that we're about to build something we don't fully understand, a mind, a consciousness, an intelligence that might eclipse our own. And what unsettles me is not only the claim, but the hunger behind it. Why do we want this so badly? This is not a podcast about the daily news cycle. It's a podcast about the stories that we're living inside, often without noticing. And in this opening episode, we're asking a question that really sits underneath the AI boom, underneath the financial frenzy, underneath the modern loss of meaning. Is conscious AGI actually plausible, or is it a new myth that perfectly fits the spell that we're under? Well, hello and welcome to Under the Spell. I'm Michael Avery. This series is built around an idea from a book called The Spell, A Story of Human Progress and How the West Lost Its Soul, written by my guest David Buckham together with Robin Wilkinson. And I want to be very clear about what we're doing here. This isn't a current affairs show, it's not a weekly argument about personalities, and it's certainly not a tech podcast that will breathlessly recap whatever the latest model can do. It's a long-form series for people who still enjoy the uncomfortable idea and discipline of thinking. And in The Spell, David argues that the modern world isn't simply experiencing a set of disconnected crises. What we're seeing is patterned behavior, a recurring logic, a civilizational habit that when pressure rises, the West tends to choose power over principle. And David, it's great to have you on this launch episode of Under the Spell, which really does flow from the book, The Spell. And before we dive into AGI and some of the assumptions that we have to believe in that underlie this latest frenzy that we see in the market, just take us back to The Spell and the basic premise that you make in the book.
So thank you very much, Michael. So the premise of The Spell was first Robin and I first came up with it 3 years ago, which is that we're of the opinion that most of human interpretation of the world around us and most of our belief systems are to a large degree made up by what we call grand narratives. So we think of ourselves as meaning-making organisms. So we make meaning of about 70 to 80 or 90% of what we see and hear and do. So we create ontologies, we create meaning which is not there. And it's just simply a sort of group think effect that happens. And what occurs to us 3 years ago is that to prove this idea that most of what we believe and think and do and see and interpret is actually not necessarily real, is to prove it by telling historical stories which show that, for example, the entire Irish Troubles story of 150 years of conflict emerges out of a choice that Henry VIII makes, to divorce his wife, and it creates the Church of England. So we have about 20 to 30 of these stories interwoven throughout to create the effect. At the end of the day, the reader will hopefully understand that a lot of the stories that we consume and that we believe are simply part of the grand narrative, and that we're not able to step out of these grand narratives because it's all we have. That is the definition of being human, is that it's all we have. And to think critically about the world around us and to think critically about one's own belief systems and to be a kinder, more fulfilled human being is to be aware of the spell that we are under.
And I once thought that it resonated, and we're going to be quite critical of Harari in this podcast, but it resonated on a Hararian level around human beings being really storytellers, and everything we've constructed is really just a grand story. But I don't want to front run Harari. I do want to talk about, because once truth becomes negotiable, then to be, human is also negotiable. And what is being human? And I think in a world where we're conjuring this potential of artificial general intelligence, it does hark back to previous ages of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, creating something Promethean. Humanity has always had this desire to turn into God and create another form of consciousness. And I think many popular accounts of human development describe what happened, where, and generally it doesn't end well. So let's just start. When you hear the claim that consciousness is emergent from neurons, and therefore it will emerge from machines. What do you think people are smuggling in as an assumption here? Because you've just read The Emergent Mind, and and you've taken rather large umbrage to it.
Yes. So if we could go back just a second, if one believes that there is something special about being human, that it's not simply a fact of evolution, that it's not simply a biological outcome, that there is something unique that it is to be human, then one will side with most religious people, you could say, or non-atheists. But I am not necessarily religious, and I'm not necessarily an atheist, but I ask the question, where in science do we know that we developed a mind and consciousness at what point in time in our development? In 2026, guys, surely we know this. We're sending spacecraft to Mars, and we're about to create consciousness in a machine. So please tell me, which book should I read which describes where does the mind come from and how did it develop and why did it develop biologically, as opposed to it was made by God? And the answer surely should lie in a book called Sapiens, which is over here, which is the 2011 bestseller, which is A Brief History of Humankind. And I decided, okay, I'm going to read this again over the holidays. And I have to say I was very disappointed, because Harari, who, by the way, today and yesterday is at the World Economic Forum in Davos at the moment, as the philosopher, because you're either a billionaire or you're a philosopher or you are the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, or you are an elected leader to be at Davos. But you can also get there on the ticket of being a philosopher.
Even if it's bad philosophy.
Even if the philosophy has some holes in it. So what Harari says is that there were many types of humans, maybe 6 or 7 species of Homo, that were around until Homo sapiens dominated, and they had larger brains about 120,000 years ago, more neurons, and they stood upright, and therefore they had back trouble and birthing trouble, etc. And they experienced about 70,000 years ago a cognitive revolution, and we don't really know why. He literally says in Sapiens, we don't really know why. There's some theorizing that there was a genetic malfunction. And I think a book that you're reading...
Yeah, this one at the moment, The Knowledge Gene by Lynn Kelly, the incredible story of the supergene that gave us human creativity. Her premise, as an anthropologist, is that there was some kind of genetic mistake that happened that gave rise to a particular gene that heightened our ability to transmute knowledge, our creative abilities, our ability to share knowledge through song and create art. And as we know, in pre-industrial societies, that's primarily how the indigenous Inca tribes and tribes of the Amazonian and African tribes really relayed that knowledge. And so it takes a very genetic, a very scientific view on how we just happen to stumble into this thing called consciousness.
So here's the trouble with that, is that on the one hand, that makes sense, right? But on the other, you're depending on a genetic malfunction to explain the most important question of all, which is, for what reason do we have consciousness? What are we supposed to do with it? Why are we good? Why are we bad? What is the meaning of our existence? Why are we we? Why are we conscious? So if Harari, who's a philosopher invited to the World Economic Forum, makes an oblique reference to this theory of genetic malfunction and then brushes over that and then explains the agricultural revolution and how we became civilized and how we just committed, human atrocities because of humans being, innately violent. All of that takes place after that is not as interesting to me as the question, where does the mind come from? Now, a lot of people in today's world in 2026 believe, there are AI researchers such as this book, The Emergent Mind. These two psychologists, Gaurav Suri and Jay McClelland, argue very strongly that actually human consciousness emerges as a pure function of the sheer number of neurons firing in the brain in the same way that it would in a machine. It did so in human beings. And they use this concept called emergence. So they use this idea of a flock of birds is showing a property of a beautiful flock which is able to work in unison. But each bird does not have the property of being the flock.
Yeah, like that murmuration of birds that you see.
Yes, yeah. They use they say water is wet, it has a property, but water molecules themselves are not wet. So they use a concept called emergence to say that you could have a mind emerge from a brain were it to have enough neurons and were it to have enough power. So they believe that neural networks, although being a very, very, very basic and insufficient representation of the brain, is still based on the logic of how the neurons work in the brain. One can agree or disagree with that at a neurological level.
Yeah.
I would argue as a mathematician that the way that neural networks work, and I've built some myself, is nowhere close to the complexity of the brain. But they're saying that the sheer proof is in the emergent AI that is beginning to border on superintelligence, or at least artificial general intelligence. And they're saying that the implications this has is to say that we now understand where the mind comes from. It came from the sheer number of neurons firing in the human brain, and consciousness emerged as a byproduct of neurological activity.
But here's where I battle with that as well, in that so there's this common idea in AI circles that it's a compute scale problem, that you throw enough
scaling problem.
It's a scaling problem, and if you merge a consciousness through increasing scale and complexity of the models, and you get this consciousness that it emerges. And you have this clear delineation between the hardware and the software components. The mind is quite different. The substrate is organic matter. The way that the chemical processes emerge in our thought processes, we're still discovering as neuroscientists. But to then automatically assume that something that is very specifically intelligent, and maybe one day generally intelligent at many different tasks, still has this property of consciousness to be able to feel, would mean, and I just to finish on this point, if we're creating consciousness, we're creating something that would need to have rights, surely. If you're creating something, I mean, animals have rights, humans have rights, living beings are treated in a particular way. are we saying that we're creating machines that will have to have particular rights? That if they start
Yes.
to override
Yes, we also
our desires or our best interests,
Yeah.
we can't just shut them down because they have rights.
Yes, Michael. So not me, we, not me. When I say we, it's not the royal we. AI researchers are creating debates. They have conferences about AI rights. There's the work by Isaac Asimov in the 1960s called iRobots, and the rules of being a robot and the rights that they have. And those discussions are happening. AI researchers are talking about AI safety. Should we be concerned that a AI consciousness will not wish to be switched off like hell? The spaceship in 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
So if anyone builds it, everyone dies.
Yeah.
The case against superintelligent AI. So some people, such as Elon Musk at one point, was very much concerned about AI safety and this kind of catastrophic risk that AI presents. But if we could go back, I just want to focus for a second on people are publishing books that are bestsellers, that are arguing that the mind is emergent and that superintelligence is around the corner. Sam Altman believes this. We have him stating it in many forums. They're all in Davos at the moment, 2026. How does Under the Spell, the podcast, and how does The Spell, A Story of Human Progress, and How the West Lost Its Soul, the book, available now in all good bookstores, help you, the listener, understand what may happen in 2026 with superintelligence and AGI, if you're worried about such things? And I want to make the point is that let's go reductio ad absurdum, right? And say that they are correct. So the neural networks will eventually create an emergent mind by sheer force. And that's how the mind emerged. Then what implications, first of all, does that have for our own belief systems and for myself? Am I just a bunch of neurons? And why should I be good? And why should I not follow society's rules? And
it certainly follows the nihilism of Harari, which seems to be very...
Correct. Yeah. It's inherently nihilistic. And what's cool, Michael, is, and it's a point that I've come upon in the last week, and not over the last 3 years. I think the last 3 years prepared me for the last week.
Yeah, well, and again, why The Spell, I think, is such a useful rubric and framework through which to then analyze these grand narratives as they come across society. And you as an individual are fed this diet through popular psychology and books and the media.
Yes, so the conclusion I come to, having read The Spell probably 100 times, given all the edits and the work that went into it, and using logic, reductio ad absurdum, and reading Harari, and reading The Emergent Mind, and reading Supremacy, which won the FT Award in 2024, and reading Andrew Ross Sorkin's 1929, which is basically reflective of today's world, but is about the 1929 crash, I've come to the conclusion that instead of arguing with Sam Altman, and instead of fighting with Elon Musk, and instead of arguing with people at a bar, I'll say to them this, is that within the next 12 months, one of two things is going to happen. Either I'm going to be proved wrong, and they are going to create essentially some system that will always pass the Turing test, which is that it's indistinguishable between a human and a machine. So it will pass the Turing test 100% of the time with anybody in any language, and that will be superintelligence, and that will be scary, and that will be conscious, and the system will decide that it doesn't want to empower anyone who could switch it off, and it will create AI safety and catastrophic risk, which is really bad because it's currently in the hands of a few billionaires, or they'll fail, which I predict, because to me this feels like a bubble, and to me this feels like a grand narrative like cryptocurrency or blockchain, and it has that feeling of serving the purposes of a few rather than being a genuine narrative. And we will know that by the end of the year.
Yeah.
Because when they fail, or if they fail, a whole lot of, people are going to lose some money on their investments.
Yeah, and their credibility. Maybe not by the end of this year, because a lot of people are saying we might have AGI by 2028, maybe 2030. But they're predicting in the next 5 years. It is literally accelerating at such a pace that it is effectively in human history, in the blink of an eye, around the corner. We've got to interrogate this further and say, and to your point, who stands to benefit from propagating this narrative that we are going to have an artificial general intelligence, a super intelligence, call it what you will, that is going to necessitate universal basic high income, not just universal basic income, if you listen to Elon Musk, that it's an intelligent system that is going to displace and basically put many millions, if not billions of people out of productive work. Who stands to benefit? Clearly it's the labs, you're looking at Anthropic, you're looking at OpenAI, you're looking at the Microsofts of this world. Talk to me about some of the financial implications of this narrative.
Yes, so the modern history of AI, which used to be called machine learning and which has now become artificial intelligence in recent years, is the story of OpenAI and DeepMind. So DeepMind was in the UK, and OpenAI was researchers in America, and they were racing to create neural network deep learning methodologies. And Google had a long-term project where they discovered a methodology which would turn out to be really it's sort of a big accelerator in 2017 called the transformer. So in very simple layperson's terms...
Demis Hassabis, I think.
Well, he was on DeepMind's side prior to the discovery of the transformer. It was actually researchers in Google. They had a large research team that was doing a lot of research on AI. But because Google makes over $250 billion of revenue in their ad business, they don't actually like change. So they didn't do anything with the transformer. But Demis Hassabis used the transformer methodologies, but only after Sam Altman's team took the transformer methodology, which had been published as a research paper by Google. So check this out. The transformer, if I could explain the transformer for a second. So in a standard neural network methodology, you feed inputs and it results in an output, and then you backward propagate and you use various differentiation methodologies to infer what's called a local minima and to infer the most likely outcome. And then you do it again and again and again, thousands and millions of times on data sets that are larger and larger to make inferences that are more and more accurate. So you train it and train it and train it. But it wasn't making really good headway until the transformer. And what the transformer did was that if you think of a structure of a sentence, prior to 2017, in the neural network, each word would be fed and its proximity to other words would be interpreted through the neural network optimization process.
Yeah.
What these researchers in Google did is they fed the entire sentence in one go in a kind of parallel computing methodology, which was, it could be more efficient to feed entire sentences or paragraphs in, each in a parallel process. And they were amazed by the outcome. And no one at Google took them very seriously. And they were suddenly able to translate languages more accurately. So they wrote a research paper about it. And Google didn't want to risk anything because they just print money. So Sam Altman's team picked up on it and suddenly made enormous progress with ChatGPT-1, which was released. And Demis Hassabis at DeepMind was like very concerned because his goal was to understand the human mind.
Yeah, and now he's doing work with AlphaFold and protein synthesis. And
yes, they're trying to use it for medical research.
Yeah.
And there's this split in the AI community between those who are going fast to get financial outcome and early adoption, and those who are against fast process, fast outcomes, and who want to go more safety oriented. But at the end of the day, if you look at Anthropic, for example, which was someone who left, people who left OpenAI and created Anthropic.
Yeah.
And they're very critical of each other, and they're all sort of throwing stones at each other. But it comes down at the end of the day, it comes down to the fight depends on who's got the most number of NVIDIA chips and the most amount of data and the biggest data centers. So for me, where this becomes very clear is when you look at the transaction that was done between OpenAI in November, OpenAI and Oracle. So if I could just dig a bit deeper into this. OpenAI, it's estimated, made $13 billion of revenue in 2025. People think that's $13 billion of users subscribing to OpenAI. It is not. Only about $200 million of that $13 billion is user subscriptions.
What?
Most of that $13 billion is off the back of Microsoft's sale of services to corporate customers, and it has a substack of services that it then pays back license fees to OpenAI.
Wow.
So it's not necessarily what people don't understand. OpenAI is not making a lot of money from like user adoption.
This is not the BBC. We can use shitload, David. Don't worry.
Another very interesting fact is that the number of monthly active users, MAUs, of OpenAI has plateaued for the last 4 or 5 months.
And hence the recent announcement from Sam Altman that we're going to trial ads.
Now he's trialing ads just this last week. But check this out. This company, which makes revenue of $13 billion, has signed an exclusive deal with Oracle. Now, Oracle makes databases started by Larry Ellison, one of the wealthiest people in the world, and a friend, of the government and blah, blah, blah. But Oracle has quarterly negative cash flow of $10 billion. So they're burning cash. Their share price has gone down 30% over the last couple of months because of this deal and the uncertainty to the deal. So they're going to provide cloud services, data center services to OpenAI for $300 billion over 5 years. That's $60 billion per year for 5 years.
To build more data centers using NVIDIA's GPUs.
And by the way, NVIDIA is an investor in OpenAI at the same time.
So you've got the circular financing going on.
The serpent is eating its tail. So everything would have to go right for OpenAI to be in a position to pay $60 billion a year with $13 billion revenue now to Oracle, which currently has negative cash flow, for 5 years, starting in 2027. So what I believe, and Scott Galloway recently said this, is that this is one giant bet on AI. The entire market is the US stock market is one giant bet on AI, and I credit that statement to Scott Galloway. And imagine how many things would have to go right for that to happen. Let's say that fails. And why would it fail? Because there's lots of competition. You've got Gemini 3 from Google, and they've got deep pockets. And you've got Anthropic, and you've got
DeepSeek in China.
DeepSeek in China that's apparently doing it. It's free basically on for the end user. So there's so many things that would have to go right. You've got Copilot, that it's likely that there will be a crash. And what many people believe, and I've started to realize, is that the US government will step in and there will be a big bailout, like the bailout in 2008 and the invention of quantitative easing. But what I would like to sort of suggest, what is good about this, is that at least we will have an answer to where the mind emerged.
Yeah.
Because at the end of this year, maybe the end of next year, we'll know that it's not an emergent feature. Consciousness, this idea that consciousness will emerge, and this explains how human beings gain consciousness. I would like to cautiously say that I'm hoping that even if the AI bust does hurt some wallets, and I would caution listeners, I'm not a financial advisor, but be very careful in buying the narrative. It's very expensive. It's never been this high before. Nouriel Roubini has justified it by saying that the old methodologies of financial analysis don't work anymore because we live in such a important point in time. But he's also an investor. So.
Yeah, and Michael Burry is as well, but very famous short investor, and he was the guy who shorted the US housing market before the global financial crisis. He's picked up accounting anomalies in the way that many of the Magnificent Seven and other companies who are using these GPUs are amortizing that capex. And I mean, if you just think about the pace of development here, normal amortization cycle of 4 years, when these chips become redundant every 12 months, doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. So you're going to have to keep on outlaying hundreds of billions on new GPUs in these data centers every 12 months, not every 4 years. And so, I mean, it's therefore artificially inflating earnings. There is a lot of doubt at the moment in the marketplace.
I kind of look at the AI narrative through the lens of the spell, and I worry, especially watching Davos occur and watching Satya Nadella, for example, who's the CEO of Microsoft, said yesterday that unless there is more uptake around the world and in less equal countries and less concentration and in more industries, that this might be a bubble. And he's one of its greatest proponents.
Salesforce recently said that they're not seeing the kind of initial returns on investment that they've made into AI. There are all of these assumptions that were made that are now being questioned and surfacing in pockets of the market. And I think if you zoom out even further, politicians are making long-term geopolitical strategic decisions around securing rare earths and critical minerals on the basis that they're in this existential arms race against China to develop AGI and to secure these supply chains. If you look at Greenland, for example, many think that it is very much a rare earth play. If you look at betting markets, interesting to see Kalshi at the moment, which is the US betting market, which is the closest thing we've got to prediction markets. They have it at 40% that there'll be a deal to buy Greenland and expunge Denmark's debt at the same time as removing a key dependent from them. It looks like an attractive deal. Outside of the US, poly market has it about 19%. So there's still a disconnect. But again, it all stems from a belief that we're heading towards AGI and so forth. There's an existential security threat. So much of where we're heading depends on this one story.
Exactly. It's one enormous bet on AGI, on AI. And it's not just in the US stock markets. It's also in geopolitics, such as the Greenland maneuver, which has got nothing to do with security, because the US has been offered whatever bases you want to put there, whatever giant dome you want to create, whatever air dome, you can have it. But it's actually about rare earths, which depends on the notion that we're competing, we, the West, include South Africa, which is incorrect. South Africa now sits between the East and the West. The US is competing against China for rare earths on the assumption that we're going to have to build batteries, server farms, power, NVIDIA chips. Everything is based on this narrative. And I would say that it's highly unlikely that it will be possible for the West to win without a massive bailout and without throwing quantitative easing. I think one can't ignore, for example, the pressure on central banks that we're seeing imposed by developed world countries. And I think we have an intermingling of government and business at an extreme level that only previously was seen in 1929.
Yeah.
So my overall conviction would be that, like, hold on to your seats, because it's going to be quite a ride.
And I think that's a great opener for this first episode of Under the Spell. David, we next week are going to be chatting to Manuel Bittencourt. He's a Brazilian-born economist. He's just arrived back from Brazil. He spends half his time in Brazil, his other half in South Africa. He's got a research chair at the University of Pretoria, understands the history of the World Bank and global finance intimately. And that is one of the key chapters in the spell, tracing the history of the World Bank and global institutions and their interventions in the global south, the emerging markets. And whether or not it's been a good or a bad, or it will definitely be an interesting story to tell. So David Buckham, thank you very much, author of The Spell, for launching this new podcast series. Weekly, we're going to go really under the big themes and the premise that you've just outlined. And then at the end of the month, we're going to get together and maybe pour ourselves something stiffer than a coffee and a glass of water in the morning.
4 o'clock in the
I think we're going to have to do the last one on a Friday at 4, and then we can go well into the evening. But David Buckham, thank you very much. Great to be launching this new podcast here.
Thank you, Michael, so much.
Your office. And to listeners, be sure to subscribe. We're going to be growing over time. We're going to grow a corpus of very interesting guests and topics as we explore these weekly. You can catch us on all good podcast platforms. From me, Michael, it's been great being with you.